This episode of Mr. Hutchings History is now streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all your favorite platforms like Castbox, Podcast Addict, and Amazon Music. Tune in now.
Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
All right, strap yourselves in.
Because we're going deep.
Deep into the Battle of Midway today. It's June 1942.
The Pacific is a powder keg.
And Japan, they seem unstoppable. Pearl Harbor,
Singapore.
the Philippines.
Yeah.
It's like they're redrawing the map with every victory.
It really was a stunning show of force.
You know, they spent years
Building up their navy.
building up their navy.
Particularly their carrier force.
And yeah,
Those early victories really were a shockwave.
to the world.
We weren't just winning.
They were dominating, you know?
I was reading about how they sank the Prince of Wales and the Repulses.
Two of Britain's battleships
Supposedly two of the most powerful ships.
in the world at that time. And it
Wow.
was just this incredible
Display of air power. Talk about a wake-up call.
to allies.
Yeah, it showed that Japan wasn't playing around.
They had this grand vision.
You know, the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere.
Essentially, their bid to kind of reshape the entire region.
Their control.
And those early victories made it, you know,
Made that vision
He
seem
could-
very real.
rising power with a grand plan.
Cutting-edge technology.
Experienced pilots.
And on the other side,
You have America.
still reeling from Pearl Harbor. I mean,
It must have felt like the whole world.
was tilting on its axis.
Absolutely. But here,
That's where it gets really interesting. While the attack,
on Pearl Harbor was a major victory.
it's Japan, they made one critical.
Miscalculation. Okay, I'm all ears. Spill the tea.
They missed the American aircraft carriers.
They were out
No.
at sea bringing the attack.
This might seem like a small detail.
But it would have enormous
Consequences.
so even in that moment of apparent triumphs
The seeds of Japan's downfall.
were being sown. Gotta love those little twists of fate.
They shape history.
Exactly.
And it's important to understand why those
They're
carriers...
so crucial. Japan had built their entire
Naval
around these floating fortresses,
No.
essentially projecting air power across vast distances. It was revolutionary.
For its time.
So while everyone else was focused on battleships
Japan was already thinking a step ahead
with this carrier-centric approach, what was America's response?
to this new style of warfare.
Well, they were,
Initially outmatched in terms of naval power,
but America had two key advantages: industrial capacity.
and intelligence. By 1944,
They were building carriers
at an astonishing rate,
far surpassing anything Japan could muster. It was like this
a giant industrial machine.
kicking into overdrive.
So even though they were playing catch-up
America had the potential to overwhelm Japan
with sheer numbers,
in the long run. What about the intelligence edge? How did that come into play?
American codebreakers,
Had managed to crack the Japanese naval code.
giving them a window into Japan's plans
And this was absolutely critical.
in the lead-up to Midway,
So both sides have their strengths. Japan with this early momentum.
and technological edge.
America with their industrial muscle and code-breaking skills.
It's like this classic clash of titans.
Each with their own unique advantages.
But how did this clash end up focused on this tiny atoll,
Like Midway.
Japan, looking to deliver this knockout blow?
The U.S. Pacific Fleet decided to target Midway Atoll,
They believed that they could lure,
the American carriers, into a trap
crushing them in a decisive battle.
and solidifying their control over the Pacific,
It was a bold gamble.
especially considering their earlier mistake at Pearl Harbor.
They were betting everything on this one.
Decisive victory.
They were.
But what they didn't know
Was that American codebreakers,
had intercepted their plans.
Admiral Nimitz,
In command of the U.S. Pacific Fleet.
knew exactly what was coming.
This is where it gets really interesting. So Nimitz has this crucial intelligence.
He knows Japan is coming for Midway.
What does he do? Does he pull back?
Avoid the fight.
He does the opposite.
He decides to use this intelligence to set a trap.
Of his own. He gathers his available carriers
The Enterprise
Big.
and the damaged Yorktown.
and positions them to intercept the Japanese fleet.
Wow, talk about a high-stakes poker game.
So the stage is set for this epic showdown at Midway.
Both sides think they have the upper hand.
But only one can walk away victorious. I can't wait to dive into the battle itself.
Battle of Midway
From June 4th to the 7th, 1942.
was 4 days of absolute chaos.
You know, imagine the sky above this tiny atoll.
Filled with fighter planes.
Dive bombers, torpedo planes, smoke. It must have been like something...
Out of a nightmare.
I'm trying to picture it.
This tiny island suddenly transformed
Into this epicenter of naval warfare.
What were some of the key moments?
That turned the tide.
Well, on June 4th.
Japanese dive bombers crippled the Yorktown.
This was a huge victory for the Japanese.
But it also distracted them.
They were so focused on finishing off
The Yorktown.
that they missed a critical opportunity.
Wait, what happened?
It sounds like one of those moments where everything...
Could have gone in a completely direction.
American dive bombers from the Enterprise
Then the Yorktown.
arrived over the Japanese carriers.
Almost unopposed.
The Japanese
Still focused on the Yorktown.
had their decks full of fuel
Armed planes.
ready for another attack.
Oh, man, so they were caught.
Completely off guard. That sounds like a disaster.
Waiting to happen.
It was. In just 5 minutes.
American dive bombers turned the tide.
As the battle.
And arguably the entire war.
In the Pacific, the Akagi
It's you.
and engulfed in flames.
Wow. 5 minutes that changed history.
It's hard to grasp how much can hinge.
On such a short period of time.
What about the 4th Japanese carrier?
The Hiryu,
The Hiryu
initially out of position,
launched a counterattack.
that heavily damaged the Yorktown.
It looked like,
You know, the Japanese might regain some momentum.
but later that day,
Dive bombers from the Enterprise
found the Hiryu and crippled her.
as well.
So in the span of a single day,
Japan lost all 4 of their carriers.
that had to be a devastating blow.
Uh,
It was a complete,
Reversal of fortune.
and it highlighted another,
Crucial aspect of the battle.
the difference in the two sides. Ability.
Absorb losses.
You're talking about attrition warfare.
Right. Remember you mentioned...
America's massive industrial capacity earlier.
Exactly.
Japan simply couldn't replace their losses.
Especially their experienced pilots.
America was just getting warmed up.
Their shipyards were churning out,
A carrier in
training new pilots at a rate.
Japan just couldn't match.
It's like that old saying,
Amateurs talk tactics.
professionals talk logistics.
America might have been behind at the start.
But they had the infrastructure.
To win a long war of
Here's
attrition.
an example. And
Historian John Keegan
in his book, The Price of Admiralty,
argues that Japan's defeat at Midway
was so decisive that their naval
was
advantage
so dominant.
could never be made good.
So Midway wasn't just
A tactical victory. It was a strategic turning point. That fundamentally shifted the balance of power.
in the Pacific
Absolutely. It forced Japan onto the defensive.
for the rest of the war. And they were never really able to recover.
It's amazing how this one battle
Fought over this tiny speck of land
in the middle of the Pacific
had such a profound impact.
on the course of World War II
It's a
to
testament
the bravery and sacrifice
by the men who fought,
on both sides.
as well as the strategic decisions,
That led to such a...
decisive outcome
Now, I know there are different ways
that historians have
the
interpreted
Battle of Midway.
over the years.
What are some of those perspectives?
And what can we learn from them?
You're right. There are several schools of thought.
On this, the traditionalists
See Midway as a triumph,
of American bravery and strategy,
emphasizing the tactical brilliance
of Admirals Nimitz and Spruance.
and the courage of the American pilots.
It's easy to see the appeal.
Of that narrative
It's a classic story.
of the underdog outsmarting.
And outfighting a seemingly superior opponent.
Then you have the revisionists
Go
who
on.
point to significant Japanese errors.
Arguing that their defeat was largely...
Self-inflicted.
So what kind of mistakes?
We're talking about here.
Well, for one,
The decision to launch a simultaneous attack
on the Aleutian Islands,
divided Japan's forces
has diverted resources
from the main attack on Midway their commanders made
a series of tactical blunders,
during the battle itself,
like delaying their attack runs.
and failing to adequately
It sounds like they were trying to
do too much at once.
And those miscalculations ultimately,
That cost them dearly.
that's the
They needed
revisionists.
space.
And then you have the post-revisionists.
Who take a more balanced approach,
They acknowledge the tactical skill
but also
to
emphasize.
Japan's inability to replace their losses
So it was a combination,
of American brilliance and Japanese weaknesses.
both contributing to this.
A pivotal turning point in the war.
Exactly.
And finally, you have the Marxist historians,
Who place Midway with
the
America,
broader context of imperialist struggle
arguing that it was ultimately a battle
over resources and control.
of Asia. It's fascinating how
A single event can be interpreted,
in so many different ways.
each offering
Technique
perspective.
on its causes and consequences.
It really speaks
Adds
to
the
the
complexity of history.
and the importance of considering
Multiple viewpoints. Man, what a journey.
we've gone from Japan's lightning rise
To the clash of carriers at Midway.
and even explored how historians
Have grappled with this pivotal event.
over the years. I feel like I've earned a history degree.
Just listening to this.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
But it's definitely a fascinating chapter in history,
Full of lessons.
even today.
Speaking of lessons,
What are some of the key takeaways
you think our listener
should walk away with from this deep dive?
into Midway
I think the biggest takeaway
is just how quickly
is
can change.
in war. Japan seemed unstoppable in those early months of the Pacific War.
But a single battle
A handful of key decisions.
completely reversed.
No,
Their
it's
momentum,
already-
it really highlights the importance
Its
of
adaptability.
and resilience
You know, America was able to adjust
to this new style
in carrier warfare
and leverage their industrial strength.
to turn the tide.
Exactly.
Midway also underscored
The importance of intelligence.
in modern warfare.
The American code breakers
Played a crucial role.
in setting the stage for victory.
They were able to
Predict
anticipate
Sans moves.
and plan accordingly.
That's a lesson that applies.
Far beyond the battlefield.
Information is power.
Whether you're fighting a war or navigating the complexities of business or politics.
Absolutely.
And of course,
Midway cemented the rhyme
successor warfare,
as the dominant force.
naval combat
The age of the battleship
was over,
and a new era of air power
projected from these mobile platforms.
had begun.
It's incredible to think how this one battle
Essentially shaped the future of naval
for
strategy.
decades to come.
It's a reminder that sometimes
Even small events can have this ripple effect.
that changes the course of history.
It's one of the things
It makes history
just so fascinating.
Yeah.
These seemingly isolated events,
can have such
the
profound.
lasting consequences.
Now, before we wrap up
I want to leave our listener,
with one final thought,
imagine for a moment
if Japan had succeeded,
at Midway.
what if they'd managed to destroy the remaining American carriers?
It's a chilling thought.
Might
Have dragged on with even greater loss of life.
on both sides.
It's impossible to know for sure
But it's a reminder
of just how high the stakes.
that we're at Midway.
It is a sobering thought
And a reminder
of the courage and
of
sacrifice
those who fought.
in that battle.
Well,
I want to thank you for guiding us through this incredible.
deep dive into the Battle of Midway
I know our listener has learned a ton.
today.
It's been my pleasure. It's always exciting to delve into
Pivotal moments in history.
and explore their lasting impact.
And to our listener
Thank you for joining us.
on this journey
We encourage you
to keep exploring
this fascinating period.
and consider
Infamouses.
the many lessons.
Until next time.
Keep those minds curious,
And those history books.
open.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.